Not all affection is sacred. Some women use intimacy as a weapon cloaked in tenderness. This is a difficult truth for many men to swallow, especially those who carry within them an unconscious longing for maternal approval. The woman who extends herself as a balm, a remedy, a soft landing for a man's wearied heart, may not always do so from a place of purity. Sometimes what appears as nurturing is actually control draped in compassion, and what seems like care is only a calculated grip of the soul. There are women whose love is not a river but a net, whose kindness is not healing but binding. It is tempting to believe that every woman who gives affection does so from a place of sincerity. But when affection is used as a means to dominate, to anchor a man to a false sense of security, it becomes a distortion of divine order. Intimacy is no longer a language of unity. It becomes a silent tyranny. A man unaware of his own emotional deficits will be drawn to this kind of woman like a moth to flame, sensing in her not love but familiar pain disguised as salvation. She appears to be everything he has longed for: understanding, attentive, warm. Yet behind that warmth may dwell a cold calculation, a desire not to support but to subdue. In the Bible we are said that there are those who flatter with their lips but harbor deceit in their hearts. A woman can speak peace and embody unrest. She may touch a man's face while plotting the erosion of his will. The tragedy lies not only in her deception, but in the man's hunger to believe it. When he has not healed the fragmented places within himself, he will often interpret captivity as connection. She will give just enough to keep him hoping, but never enough to set him free. This is not love. This is manipulation veiled in femininity. There are women who study the language of men's weaknesses, not to uplift them, but to gain access to the levers of control. They learn the shape of a man's silence, the tremor in his speech when he talks about abandonment, the fatigue in his eyes when he pretends to be strong. And instead of protecting these sacred truths, they exploit them. She will say the right words, offer the right touch, cook the right meals, sing the right praises, but every act is a calculated move in a silent game of possession. The tenderness becomes a transaction. The affection becomes currency. The man becomes a pawn in a drama written not by love, but by fear and need for dominance. In the Bible, we are said that a woman without discretion is like a gold ring in a pig's snout. Beauty without depth, affection without truth, becomes grotesque. And when a man falls for this illusion, he does not fall in love. He falls into bondage. Her softness is seductive not because it heals, but because it promises a rest he never had as a boy. Yet this rest is counterfeit, a siren song that leads him not to peace but to paralysis. He begins to lose himself, slowly, moment by moment, sacrifice by sacrifice. His convictions dull, his boundaries blur, his voice grows quiet, and all the while, she calls it love. The dangerous woman is rarely loud. She does not scream or shout. She whispers. She observes. She waits. And when she strikes, it is not with fists, but with emotional hooks designed to keep him tethered long after she has stopped giving. Her intimacy is not an invitation to grow, but a leash to remain. In the Bible, we are said that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. If that is true for one soul, it can be true in the quiet recesses of a woman's soul too, especially when her affection serves only her thirst for control. A woman can mirror a man's wounds with such precision that he believes it's love. There is a haunting beauty in how two broken souls can find each other, but when one uses that knowledge not to heal but to manipulate, the encounter becomes a dangerous illusion. The man, often unaware of the fault lines in his own spirit, feels seen, even understood by her, not realizing that what he calls recognition may actually be a deep distortion, a reflection of his own pain through her curated performance. She doesn't always do this consciously. Often it comes from her own survival instincts, but the impact remains, the creation of a bond that imitates love yet only intensifies the man's existing wounds. She studies him with unspoken intent, mapping the emotional terrain of his life, not to walk beside him in empathy, but to learn where to build her control. She echoes his sorrow, adopts his language, weaves his story into hers until he cannot distinguish her feelings from his own. It feels like unity, like the divine companionship he has always longed for, but it is imitation dressed as connection. The harmony is rehearsed. The compassion is calculated. She becomes the mirror, not the companion. That Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. In this same way, a woman can cloak herself in empathy and yet operate in complete emotional deception. She will say she understands because she does, but she uses that understanding to dig deeper into the man's identity until he hands over his sense of self in exchange for what he believes is love. She doesn't overpower him. She enters through the cracks. She doesn't force her way in. She waits for his trust and then builds her throne upon it. He becomes addicted to the feeling of being known, even if the one who knows him is not worthy of that access. There is a spiritual danger in being loved for your pain instead of your essence. When a woman latches onto your wounds, she does not require your healing. She only requires your need for her. That need becomes her power, and as long as you stay broken, you stay hers. She feeds off of your disorientation, thrives in your insecurity, and convinces you that she is your anchor, even as she pulls you deeper into emotional dependency. She knows exactly what to say when you are anxious, how to hold you when you are unraveling, and when to retreat just enough to keep you chasing her approval. It is not love, it is soul mimicry. In the Bible, we are said that the lips of a strange woman drop as honeycomb, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her entrance is sweet, healing even, but her presence over time cuts into the very core of a man's being. He begins to lose clarity. His emotional compass weakens. He finds himself unable to make decisions without her validation. She has become not a partner, but an idol, one built from his own wounds, worshipped because of his own confusion. There are women who mistake intimacy for power, and their greatest tool is imitation. She will not confront him directly. She will imitate the parts of himself he wishes someone would love. And in doing so, she builds a prison, made of perfect reflections. The man, thinking he has found home, slowly realizes he has entered a hall of mirrors. Every version of himself magnified, distorted, and ultimately used against him. In the Bible, we are said that many are the devices in a person's heart, but it is the counsel of the Lord that shall stand. When a man forgets to seek truth beyond the reflection a woman gives him, he loses access to divine discernment. He trades sacred clarity for emotional seduction, and his soul begins to wither beneath the weight of a love that only echoes but never embodies his healing. The silent manipulator often wears the mask of the empath. Her power is not in loud demands or overt control, but in the quiet weaving of influence through softness, observation, and false concern. She appears to be deeply attuned to the emotional climate of others, and this illusion of sensitivity makes her seem safe, trustworthy, even spiritually aligned. But her silence is not stillness born from wisdom, it is strategy. She says little, but absorbs everything. She listens not to understand, but to collect. Every tear you shed in her presence becomes a thread she uses to sew herself into the fabric of your soul, not to comfort you, but to create emotional dependency. Men who have been starved of emotional care are especially vulnerable to this kind of woman. Her quiet demeanor feels like peace, and her attentiveness feels like love. But she is not interested in your liberation. She is interested in your submission. Her empathy is not rooted in compassion, but in calculation. She knows how to mirror pain without carrying it, how to echo understanding without embodying it. She will sit with you in your sorrow, not to help you rise, but to make you associate her presence with relief. Then, when she withdraws, you will crave her not because you love her, but because she became the drug that numbed your ache. In the Bible, we are said that even wolves can come in sheep's clothing. The silent manipulator does not roar, she whispers. Her manipulation is so subtle that it often feels like intuition. She offers you freedom, but only within the cage she designed. Her quietness appears holy, but it hides a heart steeped in ambition. She cloaks control in the language of support, speaks in riddles that make you question your perception, and uses silence as a blade. Sharp, intentional, and lethal in its timing. She disappears at the exact moment you need clarity, only to return when your confusion makes you easier to mold. There is a false light that comes from those who understand emotions, but lack the spirit. Emotional intelligence is not the same as spiritual wisdom. A woman can read your energy, mirror your mood, and even say all the right things, yet be entirely void of godly truth. In the Bible, we are said that the heart of man is deceitful and desperately wicked. And this applies not only to overt actions, but to hidden intentions. The silent manipulator hides her intentions behind helpfulness. She gives just enough to stay needed, but never enough to empower. She wants to be irreplaceable, not through value, but through emotional entanglement. What makes her dangerous is her ability to convince others, and even herself, that she is the victim. She rarely takes responsibility for the chaos she seeds. When conflict arises, she steps back, folds her arms, and lets others destroy themselves while she watches with a saintly expression. Her silence becomes a shield, her tears a form of currency, and her apparent gentleness a tool for self-protection. She understands how to appear harmless, even holy, while sowing discord in the hearts of others. Her power lies not in her presence, but in the absence she creates when she withholds love, words, or warmth at precisely the moment they are most needed. In the Bible, we are said that a whisperer separates close friends. And what is a whisperer, if not one who manipulates truth in quiet tones, in subtle gestures, in long pauses that twist the soul? She will never confront you openly, for to do so would risk losing the upper hand. Instead, she retreats just enough to make you wonder what you did wrong, and then returns with calmness that confuses your intuition. You begin to distrust your own senses, and that is exactly what she wants. The moment you begin to doubt your own voice is the moment hers becomes dominant. This type of woman is not outwardly destructive. Her damage is interior, spiritual, and deeply psychological. She will never scream, never strike, never openly command. Instead, she whispers, withdraws, and waits. She masks manipulation as emotional depth. And unless you are rooted in discernment, her silence will seem sacred rather than strategic. A woman disconnected from her soul becomes a portal for spiritual confusion. Her presence feels ambiguous, unsettling, as though something essential has been displaced within her. She can still laugh, still love, still hold your hand with warmth, but her center is hollow. When a woman's soul is no longer tethered to divine truth, she begins to operate from fragments of identity roles she performs, masks she wears, energy she mimics. There is a dissonance that clings to her like a shadow, not always visible, but always felt. Her beauty becomes eerie, her kindness unpredictable, her wisdom inconsistent. She becomes a question you cannot answer, and yet somehow you feel compelled to keep asking. This disconnection is not always caused by trauma alone. Sometimes it is born of long patterns of emotional deception, self-abandonment, or the pursuit of power over presence. When she no longer seeks God but instead seeks control, affirmation, or escape, her inner light begins to dim. She may speak spiritual words, participate in sacred rituals, or wear the language of healing, but her essence lacks alignment. In the Bible, we are said that there are those who have a form of godliness but deny its power. Her spirituality becomes a performance fluent in tone, barren in truth. You can feel it when you sit with her. You sense that her voice echoes but never penetrates, her touch comforts but never restores. She becomes a transmitter of confusion because her own internal compass is broken. She may not intend to harm, yet her very presence leaves those around her feeling spiritually disoriented. One moment she is light, the next shadow. One day she draws you in with grace, the next she pushes you away with coldness that has no explanation. The more connected you become to her, the less connected you feel to yourself. She stirs something ancient and unhealed in the men who encounter her, awakening longing but never fulfilling it, reflecting desire but never embodying safety. Her love is a labyrinth with no center, and her soul, detached from the divine, lacks alignment. In the Bible, we are said that there are those who have a form of godliness but deny its power. Her spirituality becomes a performance fluent in tone, barren in truth. You can feel it when you sit with her. You sense that her voice echoes but never penetrates, her touch comforts but never restores. She becomes a transmitter of confusion because her own internal compass is broken. She may not intend to harm, yet her very presence leaves those around her feeling spiritually disoriented. One moment she is light, the next shadow. One day she draws you in with grace, the next she pushes you away with coldness that has no explanation. The more connected you become to her, the less connected you feel to yourself. She stirs something ancient and unhealed in the men who encounter her, awakening longing but never fulfilling it, reflecting desire but never embodying safety. Her love is a labyrinth with no center, and her soul, detached from the divine, offers no map. In the Bible, we are said that when the eye is not single, the whole body is full of darkness. Her perception is split between who she pretends to be and who she fears she truly is. She cannot be present because presence requires truth, and truth requires soul. Instead, she becomes a master of projection, casting her inner esquisse onto others while appearing calm. Men who fall into her orbit begin to second-guess their instincts. They mistake their own confusion for lack of faith, their own instability for inadequacy, when in truth they are absorbing the disarray she herself has not faced. When a woman is not anchored in her soul, she begins to seek identity in how others see her. She manipulates not out of evil, but out of disconnection. She flatters when she feels threatened. She withdraws when she feels seen. She controls when she fears intimacy. Her actions become riddles even she cannot solve. She might cry and not know why. She might scream and not remember what triggered it. Her spiritual confusion becomes atmospheric, affecting not just herself but everyone in her emotional radius. And if a man is not deeply rooted in his own sense of divine identity, he will lose himself trying to decipher her. In the Bible, we are said that a double-minded person is unstable in all their ways. This instability seeps into her relationships, her creativity, her silence, her affection. She may not raise her voice or commit overt harm, but her disconnection sends spiritual tremors into every interaction. A woman without her soul becomes a vessel through which spiritual fog enters the room. Her eyes are mirrors, but they reflect nothing real. Her words are gentle, but they carry no healing. Her movements seem graceful, but they lead to no direction. She becomes a wandering soul guiding other souls into wilderness, not out of malice, but out of her own unseen despair. Some women do not seek partnership, only power through emotional possession. It is not always loud or obvious. In fact, it is often veiled in sweetness, in moments that appear tender, in gestures that seem like genuine care. But underneath the surface lies a hunger not for unity, but for dominance, a desire not to walk beside a man, but to own him. This is not the ownership born of devotion or shared identity, but the kind that slowly strips him of his will and reshapes him in the image of her control. A woman like this does not want to be loved, she wants to be obeyed. She is not seeking to merge two souls into one purpose, but to consume his essence until her presence is the only voice he recognizes. Her affection is strategic. She gives just enough warmth to keep him near, and just enough withdrawal to keep him anxious. The love she offers is not unconditional, it is leveraged. It is love with hooks in it, not hands. She does not ask for his heart as a gift, but takes it as a conquest. Each argument is not a moment of misunderstanding, but a battle in which she must emerge as the one who shapes reality. She will reframe his memory, reinterpret his words, and question his thoughts until he no longer knows if he is seeing clearly. And then she will comfort him, becoming both the storm and the shelter. In the Bible, we are said that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But this kind of woman does not offer liberty. She offers dependence masked as closeness. She may appear to support his goals, encourage his dreams, even affirm his masculinity, but only as long as those things do not interfere with her position as the emotional center of his universe. Should he grow in strength beyond her control, she subtly begins to undermine him. Should he find clarity, she introduces confusion. Should he attempt to lead, she reminds him of every moment he failed. Her power does not come from inspiring him, but from managing him, shrinking him, directing him with invisible strings. This is not always done with malice. Often it is born from a deep-seated fear of abandonment, fear of being forgotten, fear of irrelevance. So she secures a man's loyalty not by truth, but by emotional dependence. And if he is a man who has never fully confronted his own insecurities, he will mistake her control for care. He will believe that the discomfort he feels is his own failure, rather than the result of her domination. He will think he is being supported when he is actually being softened, domesticated, molded into a version of himself that no longer remembers freedom. In the Bible, we are said that it is better to live on the corner of a roof than with a contentious and manipulative woman. Not because she shouts, but because she drains. Her presence becomes a weight, her love a tether, her silence a form of discipline. And yet she smiles, she kisses, she speaks the language of intimacy so fluently that no one suspects the captivity growing beneath her touch. She does not need to raise her voice to be violent. She only needs to doubt him in small, consistent ways until he no longer trusts his own judgment without her approval. Which he calls this love. But it is not love. Love sets free. Love strengthens. Love draws a man closer to God, not deeper into confusion. A woman who seeks emotional possession above spiritual partnership is not building a union. She is building a kingdom in which she is queen, and he is subject. Her need to control is dressed in the language of care. But it is the kind of care that replaces divine guidance with her own voice. Over time, the man no longer prays without first checking her mood, no longer acts without anticipating her reaction, no longer thinks without running his thoughts through the filter of her expectations. And when a woman becomes the filter for a man's sense of truth, she has not become his partner, she has become his God. There are some women who weaponize vulnerability with surgical precision, not to connect but to control. They understand the sacred rhythm of emotional openness and twist it into something transactional. When a man opens his heart, shares his pain, or reveals his insecurities, she does not hold those truths with reverence. Instead, she stores them as currency. Every tear he sheds, every confession he makes, every private wound he exposes becomes a tool she may later wield not in love, but in leverage. She plays the long game, collecting his brokenness like sharp stones to be thrown at moments of power and balance. Her kindness at the beginning was never about nurture, it was about access. She watches how he bleeds and learns how to touch the wound again and again. And when conflict arises, she does not argue from the present moment. She reaches into the archive of his past confessions and uses them as evidence not to heal, not to reconcile, but to win. Vulnerability, in its truest form, should be a bridge between two hearts. But in her hands, it becomes a trapdoor. He falls deeper into her influence with every truth he offers, believing he is being loved, not realizing he is being mapped. She never forgets the details, not because she is empathetic, but because control requires precision. In the Bible, we are said that love keeps no record of wrongs, but this kind of woman keeps a meticulous account. She may appear soft, nurturing, even godly, but her memory is not sacred, it is strategic. She waits for moments of emotional conflict to unveil her knowledge, turning sacred disclosures into ammunition. And she does it without raising her voice. Her tone remains calm, her posture gentle, but her words are exact and devastating. She cuts not with rage, but with recollection, reminding him of his lowest places and framing herself as the only one who has truly endured him. This is not intimacy. This is spiritual warfare disguised as affection. There is a spiritual violence in using vulnerability as a weapon. When a man realizes that the person he trusted most is also the one who can injure him the deepest, he begins to withhold his truth. He starts to protect his heart, not from the world, but from the very woman who once promised to hold it safely. She mourns his emotional distance without admitting that she created it. She accuses him of detachment, of coldness, of spiritual disconnection, while ignoring the fact that it was her betrayal of trust that taught him silence. What she calls withdrawal is actually self-preservation, and what she sees as rebellion is actually resistance against being spiritually disarmed. In the Bible, we are said that the tongue has the power of life and death. Her words, when laced with memory and manipulation, do not heal, they haunt. She speaks of past wounds under the guise of care, but her timing reveals her intent. She only mentions his struggles when she wants to win. She only brings up his trauma when she wants to retreat from accountability. She uses his vulnerability not as a mirror for mutual reflection, but as a magnifying glass to expose his weaknesses while hiding her own. This is not love. This is dominance through disguise. What makes it more insidious is how easily she positions herself as the victim. When the man finally recoils, finally draws boundaries, finally becomes quiet, she tells others he changed. She presents her narrative as one of confusion and hurt, conveniently omitting the ways she systematically disarmed him with the very secrets he once trusted her with. She prays aloud, speaks of forgiveness, but continues to use sacred wounds as tactical devices. Her manipulation is cloaked in grace, but its fruit is decay. The relationship begins to rot not from absence of affection, but from the presence of mistrust that she herself cultivated. And the man, often too ashamed to admit how deeply he's been spiritually violated, stays silent. He questions his own discernment, wondering how something that once felt so safe became so suffocating. In the Bible, we are said that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. When a woman's heart is filled not with love but with calculation, her words will betray her no matter how softly they are spoken. And when vulnerability is turned into a weapon, what is lost is not just trust, it is the very soul of the connection itself. When a man begins to awaken from the trance of emotional captivity, there is a quiet reckoning that takes place within him. It is not a loud or rebellious awakening, but a slow return to the voice he silenced in order to keep peace with someone who used his vulnerability as his leash. He begins to remember the weight of his own intuition, the times he felt uneasy but dismissed it, the moments he swallowed truth to avoid her disappointment, the silent prayers he whispered in the dark when her affection felt more like surveillance than love. This awakening is not just about her, it's about him. It's about the part of him that slowly withered under the weight of a woman who knew how to look like safety while feeding on his soul. There is a particular pain a man feels when he realizes that what he called love was really dependency, that the comfort he found in her arms was laced with subtle control, that his openness was not met with honor, but with quiet manipulation, that every time he wept before her, she didn't cradle his spirit, she cataloged his confessions like a prosecutor preparing for trial. The betrayal of emotional intimacy does not bruise the skin, it fractures the soul. And yet this pain is necessary, because the man who never sees it for what it is will remain bound, not just to her, but to the part of himself that allowed it. The soul of a man longs for partnership that liberates, not possessiveness that suffocates. He is not created to be managed by a woman who confuses control with care. He is not called to bow to emotional tyrannies disguised as romantic devotion. He is not meant to forsake his voice to preserve her comfort. In the Bible, we are said that it is not good for man to be alone, but that does not mean any companionship is better than none. It means divine companionship. It means someone who reflects God's voice, not drowns it out with their insecurities. It means a woman whose heart has been broken and rebuilt by heaven, not one who collects men like tools to fix the fracture in her self-worth. What most men do not realize until too late is that spiritual confusion often wears the face of emotional intimacy. The more deeply a woman understands your pain, the more easily she can use it. The more she knows your dreams, the more power she has to belittle them when threatened. The more access she has to your inner world, the more dangerous she becomes if she is not rooted in God. Discernment is not about judging her words, it's about watching her fruit. Does her presence draw you closer to clarity or into chaos? Do you feel more yourself when you're with her, or do you begin to disappear in the name of compromise? There are women who possess wisdom, strength, and gentleness that come from walking through fire and finding God in the midst of it. But there are also women who learn to survive by controlling and call it love because they know no other way. In the Bible, we are said that a wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own tears. Some do not even know they are tearing. They simply repeat what was modeled for them: emotional domination dressed as protection, conditional affection mistaken for devotion, manipulation baptized in the language of spiritual authority. To the man caught in the web of this kind of woman, know this: silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is paralysis. Sometimes it is the noise of your own heart being ignored for too long. When you cannot speak without being corrected, when you cannot lead without being questioned, when you cannot feel without being redirected, something within you is dying. You were not made to be reshaped into someone else's preference. You were not created to be domesticated into docility. You were made to be a reflection of God's image on earth, a man whose strength is not in his silence, but in his ability to speak truth even when it threatens false peace. There is redemption for every man who has lost himself inside the emotional labyrinth of a woman who was never looking for love, only a host. There is clarity on the other side of confusion, but it requires courage. It requires naming what you have experienced, even when no one else sees it. It requires releasing the guilt she made you carry, the shame she subtly assigned you, the doubt she injected into your decision-making. In the Bible, we are said that God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. If her love keeps you confused, if her presence destabilizes your discernment, if her affection makes you question your value, it is not holy, no matter how soft it feels. Healing begins when you no longer seek her validation to define your worth. When you stop trying to prove that you are good enough to be loved correctly. When you realize that the problem was never your sensitivity, your openness, or your need for partnership. The problem was the misalignment. Your soul was thirsty, and she offered something that looked like water but left you more dehydrated than before. That's not love. That's spiritual mimicry. And it leaves a residue only truth can cleanse. There are men walking around today with voices they forgot belonged to them, smiles that feel foreign on their own faces, hearts that beat in rhythms dictated by another person's moods, approval, and withdrawal. This is not what God intended. Love is not supposed to feel like walking on shards of your own silence. It's not supposed to leave you emptier the more you give. It's not supposed to threaten your identity in order to preserve the relationship. Love may stretch you, but it should never erase you. And if it does, you must ask whether it is love at all, or simply fear wearing the perfume of affection. In the end, the greatest truth is that some women are not evil, they are just unhealed. But unhealed does not mean harmless. A woman who has not confronted her need to dominate, her fear of abandonment, her craving for control will always see partnership as territory to conquer, not ground to share. And a man who does not see this will mistake being caged for being cared for. In the Bible, we are said that the truth shall set you free. That truth begins with naming what you have allowed, what you have ignored, and what you are now ready to release. May you no longer hand your peace to someone who feeds on your unrest. May you no longer dim your discernment to avoid her disapproval. May you remember that your softness is not a flaw, it is a gift, but it must be protected. Give it only to the woman whose soul echoes the voice of God, not the one who merely echoes your wounds back to you so she can hold your healing hostage. May you rise, not in rebellion, but in remembrance of who you were before her shadow convinced you that your light was too bright. And may that remembrance be the beginning of your return,